How's it going, friends? And welcome to episode 14 of the Cynical Den Podcast. This one's actually going to be up on time. I can't remember the last time I got the podcast out on time. Over a month ago? I'm doing a great job, aren't I? Hopefully gonna have a good show for you since there's actually stuff to talk about. Part of the reason why I haven't really been able to do podcast episodes as frequently as I'd like to is because the pickings have been sparse, let's put it that way, in terms of topics to discuss, in terms of gaming and stuff that's going on in the world, you know, all sorts of things. And I suppose it would be a bit boring if I was just like, hey, here's the game that I played this week. Because then I'd be doing that every week. Though, speaking of which, I have actually been playing some new games, of which I haven't bought many this year. Horizon Zero Dawn is still sitting in my PS4, but I haven't turned my PS4 on since Zelda came out. But, and I haven't finished it either. I'm nearly there, I'm nearly done, but, I haven't gotten around to finishing it yet. That said, I did buy Nier Automata recently, and I've been putting a little bit of time into that. I think this is the first Platinum game that's actually been worthwhile in a few years. I like Platinum games because they make games in a genre that is becoming ever sparse in terms of games, that being character action or, you know, an action game with combos where you fight with melee. You guys know what I'm talking about, you know, like Devil May Cry, Bayonetta, which they made. But this one, it feels like it's actually worthwhile compared to some of the other games that they've been doing recently. I had no interest in Legend of Korra, and I heard it wasn't very good anyway. Transformers Devastation, and it's another sort of license thing. And then they started actually making bad games, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. Oh boy. And, you know, I wanted to enjoy Star Fox Zero, and there are things about it that I liked, but it had a lot of design issues, and from what I heard, they were more involved in that game than, some defenders would like to suggest. This one actually feels like a proper sort of action game. I haven't played a whole lot, but I have been enjoying it, so good job, Platinum. I mean, this has been a good year for games so far in general. It's actually kind of disappointing that I haven't been able to buy that many. I have a lot to catch up on, let's put it that way. I still want to play Yakuza 0 and Gravity Rush 2. I'll get to those after I play a match of Civilization with Australia. I gotta get onto that. You guys have no idea how happy that made me. When the announcement came that they were adding Australia into Civilization 6, I don't buy much DLC, but with that one I was like, yep, gotta do it. And then I found out that the song that they were using as the background track in that game was Waltzing Matilda. For those of you who don't know, in Civilization, when it comes to the civilizations, they'll pick like a very iconic song, and then it progresses as you progress through all of the eras. So it starts out really rustic, and then it becomes this massive orchestral epicness. And when you got Waltzing Matilda as the song that you gotta use for Australia, which is pretty much the only choice you could have had, that in itself is going to be enough to make me want to play the DLC. I got to get onto it. But seriously, that made me so happy. I guess part of the reason why I was also happy was because it was for Civilization 6, which I think I didn't really play a whole lot of it in 2016. I bought it at launch, but there were a lot of games that came out at that time. But if I had to do a list of the best games in 2016, I think Civilization 6 would be in my top 3. It'd be up there among the likes of XCOM 2, Deus Ex Mankind Divided, Titanfall 2, Doom. It'd definitely be up there because I had a blast with that game. Speaking of video games, let's talk about a sequel to a game that I didn't enjoy so much. For those of you who missed it, Destiny 2 was announced this week, and shortly following the announcement, we got 2 trailers for the game, both featuring Cade Six, the only character who I vaguely remember from the first game, and he made a good, I guess, second impression in these trailers, to the point that I was actually interested in doing a sketch of the character, which those of you who haven't seen it can check it out on my Twitter feed. It's not a well-guarded secret that I didn't particularly hold the first game in high regard. I wanted to love it, I really did. I was so excited for the game that I even bought the $200 collector's edition, which I never do, and probably never will again, partially thanks to my disappointment with the first game. Unfortunately, for everything that was good, there was a massive asterisk next to it. The universe, lore, and art design is great, but the story and characters were almost non-existent. People tell me it's in the Grimoire, but I shouldn't have to read a bunch of cards to understand the plot. Side lore, whatever, but the core plot itself needs to be in the game. The gunplay is fun, but all you do is shoot the same enemies over and over and over and over and over and over. It just wore on me. And I played that game. I really tried to play it and enjoy it. And while I did get enjoyment out of PvP, aside from some really wonky hitboxes from time to time, I enjoyed that. But when it came to fucking PvE, it was just a grind all the time. And as much as I like loot, I don't like loot enough to where I'm basically doing the same thing over and over again to get it. Maybe that's why I didn't like Borderlands that much. Those of you who are familiar with Destiny's development probably know that the game we got was not the game we saw in 2013. I think everybody is fairly aware of this. Yeah, it's speculative, but based on the information that I know, Destiny was heavily reworked in terms of its story and content during the final year of development. And there's a lot of evidence that supports this assumption. You look at some of the early trailers, which I actually did just prior to recording the podcast, and I noticed certain places that weren't there. If you look at the very first vidoc, there's this woodland area that isn't in the game at all. From what I remember, that was meant to be New Chicago or something, but it's not in the game. It's just not there. And it seems odd that you'd have this area in 2013 that you showed. You showed this area on Earth, and you didn't show the Cosmodrome at all in that trailer. It seems odd that of those two locations, you get rid of the one that you showed. In the second trailer that they released, which I think was at the PS4 event, you could see the reef, which it wasn't in the base game. It was in the DLC, yeah, but it wasn't in the base game. You could go there, but the hub world wasn't there. In another one of the Destiny vidocs, I think it was called Out in the Wild, they said that you could go to Saturn. You can't. You had to wait a year and pay $40 to go to Saturn in Destiny. On top of this, we already know that some DLC areas were locked on the game. There's no way that anybody can look at what happened with the first game and say content wasn't cut. It's very clear that content was cut from the game and sold as DLC. A Reddit leak also suggested that the story for Destiny was a lot more complex, and in terms of its premise, I found it to be far more interesting than what we got. In the original story, if I recall correctly, you discover that the Traveler is actually the villain and responsible for bringing the darkness and the end of the Golden Age, which I think is a lot more interesting. It seems a little bit more complex, because I imagine that if you had a story like that, you could work in conflict between people who have differing opinions. So some of you know the truth, some other Guardians don't, and then it causes fractures. That would be quite interesting narratively, but I don't see how they can do it now, because if it was their plan for the first game, unless they're holding it off for 2 or 3 or something like that, then it feels like it's a missed opportunity. It's very much like a Batman v Superman situation where you look at it and go, well, this is what we've got now, so we just got to work with it. However, this is Bungie we're talking about, so with all of this disappointment, I think there's a lot of potential in the series. That's the reason why I was looking forward to it. Even though the first game had lots of problems, and it did, there is potential, and there's room for redemption. And I would like to think that Destiny 2 may be their opportunity to come back and sort of redeem themselves. And I think it's something that they need to do, because I am not the only person who has negative emotions towards the first game. I'm not the only person who was burnt and who felt really disappointed with the game that we got. Of course, it is a CGI trailer, so we can't look at this and make assumptions about the gameplay itself. We still have to wait and see with that in terms of its gameplay. But when it comes to story, if the trailer is any indication, I'm somewhat more optimistic already. The 2 trailers that were released for Destiny 2 have more character than the whole first game, and the official trailer has already set up the main conflict, villain, and characters, which is a good first step. One of the big issues with the first game was that I didn't know who any of the characters were, both allies and antagonists. I can't really remember any of the characters from the first game, both good and bad. I can vaguely remember a few of the characters, but I couldn't tell you their names. And when it comes to the villains, I'm not sure who they were. I just know that there were a bunch of different factions, but in terms of antagonistic characters, I really can't think of any. And that's not good, because especially if you're writing like a fantasy or a science fiction story, the villain is very important. In terms of basic storytelling, you need to have a good antagonist. You find that a lot of the best stories generally have really strong antagonists. Star Wars, Darth Vader, Lord of the Rings, Sauron. You see what I mean? It's just a lot of the memorable franchises in terms of fantasy and science fiction excel because they have good antagonists. I don't mean good as in they're good people, I mean they're good as in they're rich characters. I found the trailer to be funny too, which I don't say often. You know, I'm the kind of asshole who'll be sitting in a theater watching a trailer and get actively annoyed when all the other people are laughing at these unfunny jokes. What I will say though, when I look at a character like Cade Six, who I like based on the trailer, I mean he seems fairly irreverent and entertaining, but it is interesting how much he borrows from other popular characters that have been excelled into stardom thanks to popular superhero movies. Guardians of the Galaxy and Deadpool are effectively the Dark Knight of this decade when it comes to setting storytelling trends. After the Dark Knight, grimdark became the new thing that everybody wanted to do, and most films and games failed at doing it well. And now everybody wants to make irreverent comedies featuring roguish main characters who break the fourth wall, timing all of this to non-score music. Don't you love it when something good gets ripped off by everybody in the industry to the point that it starts sucking? If you don't believe me, just ask the District 9 and Inception, blah, how's it going? I mean, at least that's kind of dying, but now it's fucking single piano keys in trailers. Seriously, once you notice this, you will see it in every trailer. It's fucking annoying. I'm getting sidetracked. What I'm saying is that I'm now interested in Destiny 2, and I really wasn't when the game was first announced, so they're obviously doing something right. That said, the story was one of many issues with Destiny, so I'm still waiting on a gameplay trailer. Let's just put it this way, I'm cautiously optimistic. What I'm not so optimistic about is the future state of YouTube. Oh, look at these transitions. I'm actually quite proud of the transitions that I do on this show, where I'm trying to do it kind of like in Archer, where every scene connects through dialogue, and I'm doing that with these matching transitions, and you just saw it there. Ho ho ho! Fringy! Bucking trends at every stage. When it comes to a lot of things that happen with YouTube, I never have any idea what the hell is going on because YouTube is so bad at communicating what's going on with their website. They are not good when it comes to PR, let me tell you. And in terms of these spouts of demonetizations for videos, I have no idea what the hell is going on, and I'm just trying to piece everything together as best as I can. I started hearing about this a few days ago, maybe even a week ago, when we were hearing stories about advertisers pulling their ads from YouTube. The reasons for these ads being pulled have been extremely vague, but it's been along the lines of we don't want our ads on extremist content, which I get, as long as you're a little bit more specific about what you mean. Are you talking about extremists as in terrorism? Or are you talking about extremists as in like My Little Pony fans? I don't get what you mean. And following this, I've started to notice that a lot of people have been complaining about demonetization. Some people are being hit with it very hard, as in lots and lots of videos. I'm not sure if anybody's been hit with every video, but it seems like a fair number of people have been hit. I myself have had 2 videos that were demonetized. And I think this was before we started hearing about this big number of demonetized videos. I mean, even then, it wasn't really that big of a deal because as soon as I put in the appeal, it was immediately, they immediately reinstated monetization anyway. However, you know, I could see how if you were doing YouTube full time and then all your videos started to get demonetized, that would be a little bit concerning. But then I would also like to remind you that you were basically in business for yourself on a website that you do not own. So when at that stage, you gotta ask yourself, am I partially responsible for taking such a big risk to do this full time? Don't get me wrong, I'm not making an observation that YouTube isn't a job. It is. If stand-up comedy is a job, if writing is a job like a novelist or a cartoonist, if these things are jobs, then YouTube is a job because you are entertaining people. And if you make money doing it, then it's fair. You're making money and you're doing it legitimately. That's a job. I don't see how anybody could argue otherwise. However, I think what people need to realize is that there is a risk when it comes to doing YouTube in particular full time without something like Patreon, without your own website, without merchandise or things that you sell. The risk being that you're putting all of your eggs into a basket called YouTube, a website that has been consistently fucking up for 6 or 7 years at this stage. And once the demonetization thing started happening, at that point, I would have said, all right, might be time to slowly start diversifying your revenue streams, get some merch out, maybe start up a Patreon. As long as you aren't being too aggressive about it like some people are, and we'll get to that in a minute. But the fact that YouTube is very clearly unstable and these sort of issues are cropping up, I think it's time that people start sort of assessing these risks and reacting accordingly. I may sound like I'm saying it's their fault, but that's not really what I'm getting at. I'm more saying that it's something that I think at this stage we should have expected. And most importantly, you should not be talking about quitting because your revenue is potentially at risk. I mean, there are more things that you can do. I've been noticing this a bit in the skeptic trademark community where people keep talking about how it's like doom and gloom, how they're in trouble. Certain individuals in particular are, oh, this might be the end of us. And my immediate thought is, oh, right, okay, so if your videos get demonetized, you can no longer make videos. Is that what you're suggesting? Because I hate to be the bearer of reality, but there's nothing stopping you from making videos just because you aren't making money. If you were legitimately going to stop making videos and speaking your mind on subjects that you care about because you aren't going to make money, then I'm going to question how much you care about those topics and your real incentive when it comes to talking about these things. If people are supposedly fighting a culture war, whatever the fuck that means, then presumably you care enough to where you would make videos pro bono to get the word out and to spread your message. Obviously, it'd be nice if you made money because you're putting work into it, and obviously it'd be great if you were able to do more videos than you'd be able to do if you're working full-time at a regular job. But there's nothing stopping you from still making content just because your videos are getting demonetized. Just fucking make them for free. I also think that the conspiracy theories are a little bit ridiculous. I mean, is there any proof at all that YouTube are censoring videos that have an anti-politically correct agenda? I mean, I've been hearing about this with restricted mode, and restricted mode is dumb. The idea that you basically a channel could have the vast majority of its videos restricted and there's no explanation as to why is dumb. I mean, it's a feature that I'm not entirely against when it comes to kids, but when it's removing like 90% of the content on the website, then I think it's a bit too far. But there's nothing about this restricted mode or this demonetization stuff that indicates to me that there is a political agenda at Google to silence alternative opinions. I just don't see the evidence for that. If it were Twitter, I would believe you because we know that Twitter is very, very, very anti-right entirely. Even if you were center-right, you're gonna have some issues on Twitter. And Twitter have been shadow banning people too. I mean, they've been doing a bad job hiding their political biases. But when it comes to YouTube, I just don't see that. I feel YouTube fucks up a lot, and I'm willing to call them on that. But when it comes to this, I just don't see the evidence that it's political. I think it's just, there's an issue of pressure when it comes to advertisers. And YouTube have to worry about that. A lot of people don't realize that YouTube, I think, are partially culpable for certain things that are on their website. And YouTube is not a profitable company. A lot of people forget this. YouTube costs more to maintain than it makes in ads. And it accounts for very little of Google's ad revenue. That's not an excuse for doing such a bad job with YouTube, but there's a lot more to it than I think people are willing to acknowledge. Obviously, I would like the issue to get fixed because I don't want to see people quitting, but that said, I will lose a bit of respect for people if they quit just because they're not making as much money as they could have thanks to this. Especially if your reasons are, if you're a channel that talks about ideas and ideological stuff and politics, if you start dropping off because you're not making money, then I'm going to lose a lot of respect for you. I mean, seriously, just keep making videos. Just push through it if you care that much about these topics. Regardless of whether my videos get demonetized or not, I'm still going to make videos. I'm still going to do my thing. I guess partly I sort of am a little bit of a better position because I own my own website and host a lot of my stuff on there. Not the video stuff, but, you know, comics and things like that. And that's a lot of the stuff that I'm working on. But when it comes to videos and potentially even this podcast, if they get demonetized, whatever, I'll still keep making them. because I enjoy it. And I think that's something that a lot of these people need to remember. Are you doing it because you enjoy it, or are you doing it because you want to make money? In which case, it might be time to introspect. I think it's about time for the Q&A section. Remember, if you have a question you'd like to ask me, feel free to leave it in the comments section, and I'll get around to it in the next podcast episode. Today's question comes from somebody whose name I'm not going to try to pronounce, and his question is, what are your thoughts on Horizon Zero Dawn, Ghost Recon Wildlands, and open world games in general being the dominant game genre these days? I wouldn't have such a big problem with lots of open world games if they weren't all exactly the same as each other in terms of game design. I'm a big fan of the open world genre, but I'd be lying to you if I said that the market wasn't oversaturated, and I think that this has really sort of exploded during the 7th generation, because if you think before that, open world games weren't as common. There were a few big hitters, but a lot of games were, linear in some sense, or an adventure game, or an action game, things like that. It wasn't just open world games where the primary thing you do is shoot things. Grand Theft Auto was the top dog for a long time, and I think it was for good reason. Every game was awesome, and they did something unique with each title. Grand Theft Auto 3 was a game changer. Vice City had an awesome story and introduced new vehicles that changed things up. San Andreas went ham and introduced so many new mechanics like flying planes, gambling, property management, and 4 revolutionized the open world sandbox with its physics engine, and it had an amazing story. Every single one of these innovations has been cannibalized by other developers in some respect, and thanks to the introduction of stupid mechanics like fucking radio towers, most open world games feel exactly the same as each other. Ubisoft are partly responsible for the homogenization of the genre thanks to most of their games featuring the same gameplay loop and design, namely, get that tower and sneak, sneak, stab, yo. But it's not entirely their fault for doing that, because other developers have also been doing the same thing and getting praised for it by gaming reviewers. Even Horizon Zero Dawn, which is a good game based on the few hours I've played, is very similar to other open world games. I struggle to call it an RPG because there are no classes and the skill upgrades things like 10% damage. It's not a meaningful choice. It is an open world game, and it is still very similar to other open world games. I think Breath of the Wild has done a good job in sort of recapturing that pure open world sandbox, because Breath of the Wild is a sandbox. The way that physics works, how you can interact with pretty much everything in an organic fashion, it's definitely a sandbox game, and it's got a very pure design that I like. And if we're talking about open world games, it is probably the most innovative one that we've had in 3 or 4 years, probably since Grand Theft Auto 5, if I'm being frank. I do like open world games. Don't get this as me just chiding the whole genre. I like open world games in terms of their open design, the way that you have liberating freedom, usually. I mean, it depends on the game you're playing. But these are all things, this is a genre that I like. But it would still be nice if we got more games of different genres. RPGs, strategy games, adventure games, even just linear story-driven games. Diversify the genres that are available to gamers in the industry. I hope that answers your question. I think I kind of went off on a bit of a tangent, but that's basically the best way that I could sum up my thoughts on open world games in about 4 minutes. It's probably something that I could talk about for a whole podcast if I'm being honest. And with that, I think that wraps up the episode. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you had a good time. I certainly did. I find the podcast to be quite therapeutic for me, and I hope it is for you, especially with all the crazy things that are happening in the world, to just sit back and talk about video games and stuff like that. If you liked what you saw, feel free to head over to crudepenguin.com, as well as follow Crude Penguin on Twitter and Facebook. All of the links are available in the description. And I think that does it for me. So thank you again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next episode of the Cynical Den Podcast.